Well, this just in, pay no attention to those grocery store prices going up. The Federal Reserve says everything is under control. But not only is inflation tame now, it's likely to stay tame for quite a while. Despite cheese prices soaring and beef and chicken prices soaring and vegetable prices and pasta prices and a whole bunch of other prices for everything from the airline ticket the next time you fly to the resort you're headed to once you land. So why this continuing confidence in a Fed that doesn't seem to get it on something so basic? And why this down reaction to a Fed that traders are very much convinced does get it? What happened if all of these prices hit? Are we all going to get hit? To Sandra Smith and Gretchen Hamel and Julian Epstein. Sandra, that's what worries me. That I'm no fan of constantly going in grocery stores outside of the bakery product section, but I could even see prices going up rather markedly. But they're not showing up at the Fed or in the Fed view of inflation, and that worries me. Should it be?
Well, absolutely. And evidence of that is seen every single trading day down here on the floor of the Chicago Board of Trade in Chicago. And I'll tell you why, because every day we are seeing historic price levels for things like wheat and corn and soybeans. And while you might not think that affects you every day, that goes into pretty much everything we eat, all the way down to the Coca-Cola that we enjoy at night. The corn syrup prices skyrocketing. You're still looking at corn prices above $7 a bushel. It used to be a big thing, Neil, to say beans were in the teens. Soybeans have been in the teens for a long time now. They're above $13 a bushel. This is skyrocketing prices at the grocery store, and it doesn't look like there's an end to this anytime soon. You've got a growing population. You've got a Fed printing money, weakening the U.S. dollar, and that is spiking demand for this grain worldwide and making it pricier for all of us to eat every day.
You know, Gretchen, the Fed steps back and says we can acknowledge some of the stuff that Sandra's talking about in these various commodities. We can acknowledge even some of the stuff Neil sees when he passes by the bakery section food town. But what they give as a caveat is in the overall scheme, what with housing prices still rather subdued despite their recent gains, computer prices, of course, very low, a lot of technology, very affordable, that overall things are just hunky-dory, so don't worry. What do you make of that?
I think this is something that's unsustainable. The Fed has been dumping $85 billion or buying $85 billion for that every month, $40 billion of that going into the housing market. It's just not sustainable. There's no end in sight. And at some point, this bubble is going to have to pop.
Julian, you worry about that. Leaving politics aside of this, I want to focus on just the Fed. The markets obviously have a great deal of faith in Ben Bernanke, Helicopter Ben as he's called, to keep providing money, to keep providing all of these low interest rates via a lot of this bond buying and the like that Gretchen referred to. But are we placing our faith in the wrong entity?
Well, I think this kind of cheap money policy, there is a limit as to how long it can go on for. I think there's no question about that. I think on the flip side, when you're coming out of a recession and you're still at an economy that's at about 1.5% to 2% growth, one of the big problems is getting credit available to small businesses. I think in terms of an inflation problem, there really isn't that big of an inflation problem. Inflation is less than 2%. The best indicator on that are the Treasury yield, the Treasury bond yields. It is true that for some commodities like food, you're seeing some price increases, but that's because, in large part, because of the drought that occurred. And what you're seeing in other sectors are things that are particular to the sector. It's not an overall economic trend.
But it's really also affecting aluminum and tin and platinum. I don't want to get too wonky about it.
A little bit because they're related.
The concern seems to be that what if the Fed is just getting it wrong? Sandra, that's what I want. What if the Fed is just relying on data that is lopsidedly unrealistic?
That could be, that is certainly a reality of the situation. When you look at gas prices, you don't have to get wonky and look at these in nickel and aluminum just to understand this. Consumers at home, small businesses that need to transport their goods, they're paying skyrocketing gasoline prices still. I'm sitting in the city of Chicago where they're still paying over $4 for a gallon of gasoline on average right now, the highest in the country. So when you talk about whether or not the Fed's getting it wrong, saying that inflation is tamed, I think that a lot of drivers in this city, this large city, would disagree with that.
But Gretchen, we do hang our hat on the Fed continuing to be sort of like the only adults in town, with all the political bickering on both sides. So we hang our hats on the Fed to our detriment?
Oh, of course, to our detriment. I mean, the problem is with the Fed is that they have created this stimulus that has no end in sight, while at the same time you have a government that is spending with no end in sight and a nearly $17 trillion debt. So we basically just have this spend and spend and spend policy that's going on by the Fed and also by Congress and this White House, to where you just don't know what is on the horizon when it comes to the economy and comes to, are we ever really going to see real growth? I mean, he talked about 1% growth. A lot of people say that's because the economy, because the government spending has been getting in the way, because the economy hasn't been freed up to move forward, because we're being drugged down by the debt. There are so many different things at factor here and at play that inflation is going to be something that is going to hit this country at some point in the coming few years, if not sooner rather than later.
But Julian, it's not true that we've avoided that, right? And so we can keep avoiding it?
Yeah, no, it's not true that we're spending, as far as the eye can go. We've actually had about $2.5 trillion in budget cuts since the August 11th showdown on the debt ceiling.
Don't even get me started on that.
We can have the math up. It's relatively
Let him speak.
So if I can finish the point. And again, I think that you can isolate industries and talk about inflation in food, but I think that's related to the drought. I think you can talk about oil, but that's related to the peculiarities of the international market, and I don't think it's a particularly competitive market. But the fact of the matter is, you look at Treasury yields, and we're still looking at a situation that's very, very low inflation. And I think the focus on inflation is kind of like shooting at the decoy. The two numbers we should be worried about right now are the long-term prospects for GDP growth, and the long-term prospects in all of the analysis don't get us much above 3% for the next 10 years. That's the problem. The second number we ought to be looking at is middle-income wages, which have been stagnant for 12 years.
Good point. But
if we can fix those two problems, the other problems will fix themselves.
The yields are being forcibly kept down to those low levels, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, but that still shows the point that inflation is, with the exception of a couple of sectors that we identify, is not really a problem. But when you can force the yields down yourself to manufacture that, that's not a reflection of reality, right?
Correct.
Well, it's a complicated subject, Neil. It is a reflection of reality. It is a reflection that we are not seeing inflation in most industries. I think the point that you're making is, are you building in structural problems in the long term? And I think that's a worthwhile discussion having in terms of how long can we have the free money policies from the Fed coming out. That's a different discussion. The fact of the matter is, inflation is not a real problem today.
Let's hope so. We're going to get you guys back a little bit later in the meeting.
The people I feel for are the people who are directly feeling the pain of these cuts. They're hurting military communities, they're hurting middle-class families, our children, our seniors, the people who can least afford it. That's what this so-called sequester means.
Man, oh man, he is still going on about those sequestration cuts. But despite all of those devastating fears, no devastation, some weird things on his chopping block, including those tours at the White House. And now apparently the chef at the White House, that's right, the guy who cooks is now cooked. And the prez is now going to go hungry. Well, not quite. There are other chefs, and I'm told plenty of food. But, Sandra, it just seems like another case of weird cut, weird timing. What do you make of it?
I think weird is a good way to describe it, because before it was all about cutting things that would affect the children, possibly the Easter roll. It was, cutting back the tours at the White House that would affect students. Now we're talking about cutting back to where it would affect the first family. I don't know that they're going to get a lot of sympathy on this, because first of all, it's very, very ambiguous as to what this furlough actually means for the White House chef, because he wears a lot of different hats at the White House, by the way. He's the nutritionist, he's the gardener, and apparently he gets to keep all of those other roles. But at the end of the day, the most important thing here is this is a drop in the bucket. This is a manufacturing crisis that the president is trying to make out, and it's just a really weird cut, Neil.
I guess what I could see the PR aspect of this, Julian, is that, look, I take it a voluntary 5% pay cut in sympathy to what federal workers are enduring right now, and I've even dropped my chef, I guess. But I don't know if that strikes Americans as suffering, does it?
Oh, I think it's important that he lead by example. If they cut the funds for the White House staff, if they cut his own salary, I think it's leading by example.
Yeah, but then, that's like you, Julian, said, well, I'm firing my chef. Chances are you have 3 of them. But you know what I'm saying? Like, what does that do?
Wish, what does that do? To God's ears.
Right.
It sets an important example, because other people are going to feel the pain. We're going to have major cuts with air traffic control. We're going to have major cuts to our defense capabilities and defense families. We're going to have major cuts to the doctors that take care of your parents and my parents, all of our parents when they get sick.
When does all that happen?
Probably, if I can not be interrupted, probably by mid-year, probably by June or July. The second important point, I think, here is that the CBO has estimated sequestration could shave GDP, help shave GDP by as much as 1.5%. And look, the important point is this. Deficit reduction is not the North Star of what we need to do to be getting the economy going again. Getting GDP growth up and getting middle income wages up are what's important. But if you want to do deficit reduction, you have to go to where the money is. Obama has proposed $1.8 trillion in additional deficit reduction on top of the $2.5 that's already in law from the last 2 years. $600 billion of that is coming from entitlement reform. Everybody agrees that if we want to get a deficit reduction, we've got to go to entitlement reform.
Final
point on this is that the Republicans, but Neil, here's the point. The Republicans don't touch current entitlement beneficiaries 1 cent. They don't touch Social Security beneficiaries or Medicare beneficiaries.
I guess what I'm saying, in the meantime,
Obama's showing leadership is my point.
Well, I don't know about that. But Gretchen, in the meantime, what I'm worried about is how firing your chef or taking a 5% pay cut works in with some of the other presumably more substantial figures that Julian just mentioned.
Well, you know, like he said, it was an example. It's a talking point. It's something that they're going to point to, that the White House is going to point to show that the president is feeling the pain as well. And this afternoon, the White House came out and said that 468 White House staffers could also be furloughed starting next month over the course of the next few months, whether that be for 1 day or a few days. But these are the necessary...
How many White House staffers?
468 White House staffers.
I didn't even know we had that many working in the White House.
Apparently we do. But, you know, like Julian was saying, is that they supposedly have cut this $2.5 trillion over the course of the past 20 months. But here we're talking about feeling the pain over $85 billion. If they had truly, really made real cuts, that $2.5 trillion, don't you think we'd be feeling a little bit more pain? We're not feeling that pain. And that's
Julian might be right. Maybe that happens later on. Maybe that happens later on.
You talk to anybody in the air traffic control business. You know about the number.
That could happen.
You know about the number of towers that are going to get closed down when we come to June?
Well, they're protesting that. But you're right. It could happen later. You know, I'm sure hope springs eternal for that.
But look,
Neil, here's the problem.
Sandra, Sandra, I want to get to this. Will we ever get over this sort of dithering around on the little stuff to make a point or to the image of a point and not do something very substantial on both sides?
I mean, we're talking about setting an example. I'm sorry, we need to move beyond that. We need to make real, effective cuts that are going to make a difference in balancing out this budget. We need to do something that actually matters right now. Right now is not the time to cut one of the many White House
Julian, you think that the president has done both?
The deficit is not the central problem in the economy right now, not the short term.
But that's very clear. That's very clear from the prerogatives of both sides.
It is important that the president and the cuts that he's making on White House staff lead by example. Symbolism is important. If you want to talk about real numbers, to your question, Neil, everybody in the deficit reduction business agrees we have to go after entitlements. The president does that by going after $600 billion. The Republicans don't want to touch current beneficiaries. The entitlement programs. Wait a second. Neil, let me just point out to you that you asked about real numbers. Let me ask you.
Protest not wearing deodorant tomorrow.
Can I point out to you asked for real numbers?